Hey, everybody, we're just going to wait 1 or 2 more minutes for a few more people to trickle in, and then we'll get started shortly.
All right, let's get started. Thank you for joining our third out of 6 of our Back to School webinar series, and I'm really excited about today's session. A couple of intros and some housekeeping. I'm Alexa Bolland. I'm new with the News Literacy Project. I'm the Senior Manager of Educator Professional Learning, so our team gives professional learning, media literacy training, core news literacy concepts to educators as well as adult learners. I come from a journalism background, so as a professional fact checker, I specialized in social media myths and disinformation. I'm really especially excited about this session because I've always been really passionate about student journalism, and I've managed a couple different teen-led initiatives before becoming a journalist. I was also a classroom journalism teacher. Like I said, I'm new to NLP, so if you would like to connect, my email is in the left-hand side, and feel free to follow me on Twitter, where I talk about news literacy and Gen Z media habits. I'm also joined by my colleague, Liz Price. Liz, want to do some housekeeping stuff?
Yeah, thanks, Alexa. Hi, everybody. My name is Liz Price. I also work on our professional and community learning team. I help through our processes. I help build our sort of our back-end work, facilitating our metrics, things like that. Just a couple of housekeeping items before we hop into today's presentation. If you have any questions, feel free to drop those in the Q&A box. You can access that if you look at the lower section of your Zoom window. You'll see a little box that says Q&A. You can click that and pop a question in there. If you have just a general comment, feel free to use the chat. That's available to everybody. If you don't have access for whatever reason, feel free to just send me a direct message and I'll get you set up. We are recording this session, so if you need to hop off or you have a conflict, we will send this out via email after today. And then finally, we also have closed captioning enabled. So if you would prefer to listen along with subtitles, you can just click the live transcript option on the bottom of your screen and you'll see the subtitles pop up. And then finally, just want to thank the Knight Foundation for their funding of this webinar series. It's made possible through their generous support, so thank you. All right, I think that is all for me. You will see me in the chat. I'll be dropping links and I'll pass it back to you, Alexa.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And so we're joined today by Agatha German and Sophia Williams, the co-directors of the Teens for Press Freedom, which is a really awesome, unique student-run organization that advocates for the protection of free press. They advocate for news literacy education for young people, and the rights of individual journalists. Agatha is currently a senior at the High School of American Studies at Lehman College in New York. Sophia is currently a junior at Miracosta High School, Manhattan Beach, California. So I'm really excited about their presentation. So I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen and I will hand over the webinar to them. And like Liz said, please feel free to drop questions during the presentation for kind of our Q&A back and forth after the fact. All right, Agatha, over to you.
Thank you. All right.
All right, hi everyone. So as Alexa already said, I'm Sophia and I'm a junior. I live in LA right now, and I'm super excited to be here talking to you all.
Hi, I'm Agatha. I am a senior in New York, and I'm also really looking forward to this webinar.
Okay, so I'm gonna start by giving a little bit of a history of Teens for Press Freedom. So Charlotte and Isabel, who are the lovely co-founders of this organization, they're now off to college, but they started the organization in 2020 in the wake of the Black Lives Matter protests. Especially during this time where we were seeing journalists being jailed, persecuted, even killed in other areas of the world, because they were just doing their job and trying to report on what was happening. And this sort of reached a head in America when the journalist Oscar Jimenez was arrested on live TV. And so this really inspired the creation of Teens for Press Freedom as a free speech advocacy project through PEN America's Teen Summer Workshop. And Teens for Press Freedom really aims to focus on how young people consume information and how we interact with news media as both a generation and on the individual level.
Okay, so we have about 100 members nationwide and a few overseas, and we are split up into teams. So we have a weekly news blast that is run by the news team, and they also publish a newsletter every few months about imprisoned journalists and censorship. We have a media relations team that writes various articles as well, and they get us in touch with newspapers, kind of get TPF out there. We have a workshop team that runs workshops twice a month. We're going to talk about a little bit later too, but we generally aim to have conversations with teens and we encourage conflicting opinions. We want people to be honest and not feel like they should be silenced or sort of fit into a norm. We also have an advocacy team that works on writing legislation, and we write letters to various senators, just encouraging kids to sort of get their voices heard. So TPF recently did a War on Truth campaign, which was inspired by posters from the Soviet era and from the Vietnam War era. So on our website, you can see the War on Truth section. You'll see the original posters and then what TPF kind of made of them to make them more focused on press freedom and censorship. We also had a Stand for Speech rally in June of 2021, also pictured on our website, where we advocated for the Student Journalist Free Speech Act. We had student journalist speakers, we had various senators and congresswomen show up and give talks and kind of educate everybody on what they do and why it's important to stand up for press freedom.
Yes, so now that you know a little bit about TPF, we're going to start talking about social media and how it relates to Gen Z. So you often hear that Gen Z is the most like tech savvy generation, and this is really because we've grown up alongside Apple, Instagram, and Twitter, while our parents and our grandparents turn to newspapers, libraries, and TV news channels for information. We open TikTok and Twitter for our news instead, and we spend hours immersed in constantly updating information, some of which can be false or misleading. And though we might be better at navigating these apps, we're even less able to sort fact from fiction online. In fact, many false claims online begin as disinformation that's intentionally spread with malicious intent and are so genuinely believable to their target audience, which is usually teens, that it leads to the unwitting spread of misinformation as teens share articles and posts with their friends and family members. And this is made more harmful by the sheer amount of time that teens spend on social media. During the pandemic, a study found that teens were spending between 5 and 7.5 hours every day on social media. And this is really no coincidence. Apps like Instagram target teens, and they pour hundreds of millions of dollars into marketing to woo young people. They're especially interested in hooking preteens, like ages 12 to 14, into spending hours and hours on their sites. And not even that, but a new study has shown that younger people ages 4 to 15 spend an average of 80 minutes per day on TikTok. And TikTok's really sort of hacked the algorithm that people are really like excited about and will spend a long time looking at. The short video clips, the lack of commitment to longer form content. And so other social media sites have sort of copied that idea. Instagram Reels, YouTube Shorts, the Spotlight feature on Snapchat are all examples of this. And it just serves to make social media even more addicting for younger and younger age groups. Um, and it's really a pipeline, hence the very dramatic title on the screen right now. Um, they get kids hooked at an early age and they continue to use social media as they grow up through their teens, their 20s, and so on and so forth. And this just serves to make them more money without any regard for the damage that it can do to teens in their conception of information online. And um, it's also like those toddlers with iPads that you see on the subway. It's not all kids' fault. It's definitely parents who um, allow their child to have access to a lot of information online without really monitoring what they're doing. And it just makes you wonder how these toddlers who are on social media or looking on the internet will be interacting with apps such as Instagram, TikTok, and Snapchat when they're teens.
There's also this sort of coolness factor within teens of being politically engaged online. So social media sort of encourages younger people to craft a monolithic online persona. We carefully curate what we post based on what archetype we want to fit into. And these mood boards that you see on the screen right now, they're posts that define a certain brand or aesthetic. Crowd the Instagram Explore page. They're everything from like Tooth Fairy core to sort of being a bookstore owner. They make things that are a little bit harder or real life, they make it look pretty. They cut out all the dirty work. And as a generation that sort of prides itself on being engaged in politics, this frequently means sewing your political ideas into your social persona. There's no separation between whether you're a Democrat and like a book lover. It just becomes one. People are also going to list their political leaning in their Instagram bio. So before you even get to see their posts, before you get to know who they are, you'll know that they're a Marxist or conservative or a Trump supporter. You almost immediately know whether or not you want to associate with this someone. On top of that, the rhetoric within political and social circles is all the same. There's no discussion within political groups. We're pretty divided. On Instagram stories, we also saw this a lot during the pandemic. There were posts condemning terrorist attacks and serious situations, political atrocities that are intermingled with pictures of sunsets and friends. They're making serious situations into something aesthetic. When politics move to social media, political ideas become indistinguishable from who you are. Gen Zers don't associate with people who have opposing political beliefs. And I feel like we've learned that from the generations above us who are also separated. We see that in Congress and in our government. This sort of allows us to vilify those with opposite political leanings, shutting down any chance of discourse. We don't associate with the other side. We don't want to talk to anyone who doesn't agree with us. And people will ask you on Instagram or on social media, if you're not posting about a certain issue, if you're not posting about what's going on, what are you really doing? It's as if you don't care about politics because you're not showing your political beliefs on social media. We see this a lot with, like, it'll have a headline like, I don't know, gay man attacked. And then you'll see like, why aren't people talking about this? And you'll see that on Instagram, not in the news necessarily. And people use these infographics in place of productive conversation. They don't actually go out and do something, they just post about it on their social media. It's blatant virtue signaling where you're showing others how politically involved or politically correct you are. And it's almost encouraging people to have this one political take. You're not allowed to be unique or have your own varying opinions. These people are also just reposting and reposting all these like posts on Instagram that they see without fact checking or making sure that what they're posting is actually true. And once they post, they feel like they've done their work for the day. That's it. This kind of political engagement relieves the moral obligation to engage in politics. I post on Instagram, I'm done. Thinking that this is a legitimate way to engage in politics also means an unlimited confidence in your beliefs. You're not being checked because you're not interacting with the other side. You're not hearing an opposing opinion. So things become contentious. You see these posts, these like comments on Instagram saying, if you don't agree with me, unfollow. This also leads us to see that over half of Gen Z college students believe that shouting over a speaker is sometimes or always acceptable when it comes to political debate. We don't want to hear the other side. This is also seen in our Congress. Adults don't face situations of dissent in the way that young people do, because they're already steadfast in their political beliefs. They were Democrat or Republican or independent for so many voting cycles that they continue to be. But social media clearly has an effect on the political habits of adults. We see this represented in the highest, most important place of discourse in American democracy, our Congress. Our government is at a standstill because no one can cross party lines. No bills can get through the filibuster. Absolutism is rampant. And so now I'm going to play this video where you see Debbie Dingell and Marjorie Taylor Greene arguing over abortion rights. They're not having a conversation. They're not even in the building. They're outside on the steps yelling at each other. I do have to exit out to play this video.
Controversial GOP Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene back in the spotlight this week, this time involved in a shouting match with Democratic Congresswoman Debbie Dingell yesterday on the steps of the Capitol over Democrat support for a bill protecting women's rights to have abortion access. Take a listen.
Killing a baby up until birth is a lack of civility. It's called murder. Hey, how about the border down there? Lack of civility. How about lack of laws or protecting your children? You respect is the basic thing you're taught in church. Respect your church? Are you kidding me? Try being a Christian and supporting life. Try being a Christian and try to support life. Decently.
Oh boy, Margaret.
So you see they're sort of arguing. This is something you'd see like a video that went viral in the supermarket. This is not something that you expect to see in our Congress.
And a lot of this sort of contentiousness and one-sidedness occurs because the information we're consuming is blatantly untrue, or it can be misleading, such as this headline that you see on the screen. It says, Amy Coney Barrett, about to be confirmed to the Supreme Court, sees a scenario in which abortion should be punishable by death. Now, no matter your political beliefs or your opinion of Amy Coney Barrett, this headline is just simply untrue. And it's really alarmist and sensationalist because people want to get the clicks. And if you go back to the previous slide, you can see that the publisher of this article was Vanity Fair, which is usually a pretty credible source. But you see these things on social media and you think, wow, that can't possibly be true. And you click on it. And that's exactly what they want you to do, these companies who are trying to make money via clicks. According to a Pew Research Center study, people who rely on social media for their news are less politically informed for obvious reasons. And if you think about it, over 50% of Americans do rely on social media for their news. That means that over 50% of our population is consuming information that is untrue on a daily basis. But people are so afraid of being canceled or delegitimized on social media that they don't think critically about these things because they align with their political beliefs. So this ties into gossip and sensationalism on social media. So on the screen, you can see actually this is a promo flyer for one of our workshops about tabloids, which is sort of the social media sensationalism of 20 years ago. Um, but in reality, sensationalism has been a part of American culture since the beginning, since yellow journalism, since propaganda, intense smear campaigns such as Blame the Maine on Spain, with the sinking of the USS Maine, and the Daisy ad by Lyndon Barry Johnson against Barry Goldwater. Um, and this is translated into social media in a much more magnified way. You see shorter attention spans, especially in younger people. You see click culture and swiping through content. And because social media is such a passive activity, you're swiping and swiping, seeing ridiculous claim after ridiculous claim, something has to be incredibly provocative or outrageous to grasp your attention for even a few seconds, let alone to get you to click on it. And this really leads us to think that things that are misleading, like gossip, drama, or inflammatory opinions, are manufactured to be more profitable without regard for the people who are actually consuming this information and spreading it to others. Facts simply are no longer part of the equation on social media. It's not a question of truthfulness, it's a question of profitability. Facts don't sell. Gossip sells and lies sell. And this also ties into customized pages and content moderation. So on the screen, you can see Parler, which is a news app, primarily with right-leaning ideas. And on the left, you can see that there's filters for what you see on the app. And this curation of what you see on social media is really harmful because it allows people to retreat into curated echo chambers that reinforce confirmation bias and only show you things that they think will align with your political beliefs. And this is really um, a, a part of the monolithic political persona that people develop on social media. And people are not willing to listen to the other side in these types of situations. And it's not just Parler, it's TikTok too, with its endless customizable For You page that keeps users scrolling for hours through content tailored just for them. And I'm sure you've heard of like the different areas or subcategories of TikTok, witch talk, mushroom talk, frog talk, all those kinds of things. They may seem harmless, but they're really just reinforcing the user's habits and beliefs without allowing them to confront dissent and opposing ideas. And this is, again, an iteration of the echo chamber that you see on more pronounced examples such as Parler. Nothing is going to challenge what you're already consuming, and furthermore, everything is taken out of context. So most information that you see on social media is taken out of context in order to tailor it to what they think you'll believe, not an overall general view of the actual situation. So as you can see on the screen here, there is a woman, obviously a Trump supporter, and she says that the US Constitution states that if a president is impeached by the House, but not convicted by the Senate, that person's first term is nullified and they are eligible to run for office 2 more times. Now, if you know anything about government in the US, you know that's not true. And people believe it. Like you can see on top of that, the same fact-checking website that the woman used to verify her claim is actually saying that it's false. Um, and many claims on social media are untrue or very misleading. I'm sure all of you on your social media pages have seen something that's just blatantly false. But since engagement with social media is such a passive activity, you're scrolling and scrolling and scrolling, and you're not really induced to fact check what you see because you do it when you have a spare minute or when you're waiting for something, and you're not really inclined to do something so active as fact checking or making sure that the information you're consuming is correct. And even if you know that the information is incorrect, it can stay in your subconscious and you can give it power by bringing it up later. And a lot of the time people will repost statements that they saw on other platforms without fact or double checking them. So this bit of misinformation that you've consumed is spread to an even wider audience of your friends, your family, and others. And now, like a quick side note about satire and humor online. So a lot of the time, as I said, misinformation is taken completely out of context. And so somebody who's trying to be funny or satirical might be misconstrued as having an opinion that they really don't identify with or spreading misinformation, and they can be canceled or delegitimized for that, even if they were trying to convey a different tone than their statement was taken as. And that's where social media is really harmful because we don't accept nuance in the discourse that we have on these sites.
Yeah, so now I'm going to talk a little bit about the metaverse. I'm sure you've all heard about Meta and the metaverse. It used to be Facebook, it owns Instagram, WhatsApp, tons of other social media platforms. So things are just going to get worse from what Sophia just talked about. Mark Zuckerberg and others have been talking about this new cyberspace called the metaverse. And whether or not you believe it's going to catch on, we are on a steady trajectory to a more immersive, all-consuming virtual world. That's only going to amplify the consequences of social media, making cancel culture more powerful. People are being delegitimized. As more and more of our lives transition to this online space and our social status is reduced to likes, followers, and hashtags. I know a lot of my friends have a sort of competition between each other. Who has more likes? Who has more followers? And it's kind of really, really seeping into our social lives. We also have the death of local news here. So according to PEN America, pretty big organization, pretty trustworthy, 76% of Americans report trusting their local TV news and 73% report trusting their local newspapers. We know the people who are on the news better than we know the people who are on like NBC. So by contrast, 55% of Americans trust national network news and 59% trust national newspapers. This was just a few years ago in 2019. So as you can imagine, those numbers have changed a little bit. Advertising revenue has also decreased and gone to social media, making print news virtually obsolete and deeply cutting into the revenue of local newspapers. We can also see this through location tracking, where you see on your phone a certain ad about something that's just a few streets down from you, or I'm sure many of you have experienced this, where you're talking about something with your friends, and then you open your phone and you see the subject that you were just talking about is on your phone. It's as if they're listening to you. And they use your location to sort of tailor ads to you, tailor what you've been looking at on social media to make it more about you. Between 2002 and 2012, classified ads reduced their revenue 71% from 15 million to 4 million. Margaret Sullivan, who's the author of Ghosting the News, shared this quote: "One problem with losing local coverage is that we never know what we don't know. Corruption can flourish, taxes can rise, public officials can indulge their worst impulses." So TPF wrote a report about the sort of death of local news, and they also made a video that I'm going to play a little bit of here.
Local newspapers provide news about the issues most relevant to their communities. And yet, over 65 million Americans live in news deserts. News deserts are communities with either no or very few local newspapers and who have very limited access to credible news.
Teens for Press Freedom is an organization dedicated to protecting the free press and teaching young people how to be smart, active consumers of news. The dire state of our nation's local newspapers is a problem that's often overlooked, but access to community news is one of the most essential tenets of a free press.
National news sources are meant to represent a wide range of opinions and ideas, but because larger newspapers need to address so many different topics, many issues are then oversimplified.
Local newspapers, while far from being perfectly objective, offer a perspective tailored to the concerns of a more local community. Because of this, national politics and policy debates can be enhanced by more individual perspectives and more positive, community-centered debate.
Local news outlets can provide a solid foundation upon which a community can build trust, cooperation, and mutual understanding. But in order for small publications to do their work, they need to be protected.
The decline.
Okay.
All right. So that was a video that TPF created about a year ago, I want to say, regarding local news. And with the death of local news and even the delegitimization of national news sources comes the vilification of journalists. So during Trump's campaign and time in office, he waged a so-called war on journalism. In fact, on his first day in office, he stated that journalists are among the most dishonest human beings on earth. He posited journalists as an enemy of the people, an annoyance, and he condemned factual reporting as fake news to convince people that his version of reality held true. And Trump really changed the meaning of the term fake news. He weaponized it and said it so often that it became associated with him and not the press. And this sort of warped reality and delegitimization of journalism and factual resources caused a rise in conspiracy theories such as QAnon, which thrive on a warped version of reality. So in these conspiracies, only some facts are chosen to be believed because they fit with the premise of the conspiracy. And this is how people convince themselves that conspiracies are true, based on half-truths and incomplete facts, making them believe that journalists are liars and frauds and that the conspiracy is the true authority. And this vilification of journalists is not just happening in the US, it's really all around the world. Many authoritarian regimes use the press to amplify their power rather than to convey truthful information. For example, nearly all of North Korea's mass media originates from the Korean Central News Agency, which is a government-run outlet. International correspondents are also detained and expelled from the nation. And another example is the Philippines. So some TPF members years past got the opportunity to meet Maria Ressa, who is the CEO of Rappler, a Philippine news organization, which aims to shed light on the weaponization of social media against journalists and government corruption in their country. And she said that our dystopian present is your dystopian future. And Maria Ressa has been arrested and continues to be arrested by Philippine authorities for her criticism of the government. And what she's saying is that while journalists may not be arrested and detained as frequently as they are in other nations, we're on the way to becoming a similar type of restriction in the United States as we see more journalists being persecuted, vilified, even detained or jailed. And we look at other countries who have these restrictive governments and we say that couldn't possibly happen to us. But if you look back in those countries' histories, you see a similar path to that the United States is on right now. And this is why we need to educate people on media literacy and why the government controlling the media is wrong and not something to be proud of or to advocate for.
Yeah. So with that, our presentation is almost over. We're going to go over a few solutions that you as educators can use to educate your students on news literacy and media literacy. So I know that my school, for instance, has a news literacy class that is mandatory for freshmen, meets twice a week for a semester to educate students on the importance of credible sources and how to find them. We talk about not only how to properly cite sources, so proper bibliographies, MLA, Chicago style, whatever your school prefers, but also how to identify a credible website. So things like .com, .edu, .org, differentiating between them, what they all mean, but also the difference between media literacy in an academic forum and media literacy in a format that is applicable to everyday life. We don't just focus on the factual, you discuss the cultural aspects of media literacy and how to spot mis and disinformation, and maybe even get into why it happens. Approach it through the lens of social media to make it more accessible to teens, or something else that teens can sort of talk about, because almost all teens are familiar with social media activism and likely are going to have an opinion on it. They're going to be more engaged because it's something that they've experienced before.
And with that, it's a good idea. I know that a lot of the people in this webinar today are teachers, and if you're planning on teaching media literacy to your students, I think the best way to really get the message through to young people is to facilitate student discussions peer to peer about current events. The way our generation typically communicates is fractured at best, and discourse on social media is so two-sided that it's really difficult to get people from our generation to agree on the nuance and to have productive conversations face to face. Um, and really, having informed conversation is a skill that people can cultivate. Um, and a great way to elaborate on this is through examples. So for instance, in my experience, teens are more likely to invest themselves in something if they believe it truly will have a negative effect on them and their peers. Um, TPF workshops are a good example of the conversations that we advocate for. It's really a skill, like I said. It can be practiced. After several years of workshops, conversations have become less repetitive, parroting a slightly different iteration of what the last person said, and more nuanced, adding new ideas to the conversation without being scared that you'll be penalized or delegitimized for them. And when you have a conversation with a real person, you realize that there's a lot more nuance and flexibility to their ideas than what they present online as a monolithic profile picture and a repetitive stream of infographics. There's a lot more compassion, even if people have differing opinions. And so to end off, we wanted to ask you as educators to approach media literacy with sorry, um, to approach media literacy with compassion and help to make your students aware about the detriment of engaging in monolithic discourse on social media.
Right. And now I will hand it back to Liz and Alexa.
Amazing. That was so good. It is always really refreshing to talk to young people that care so deeply and passionately about their quality of news. So I just want to remind all of our participants that the chat is open, so please feel free to drop any questions you have for them, either in the Q&A field or in the chat box. But I'm going to I'm just going to kick off with a couple of questions. So when we see a really viral claim and it's starting to be debunked on social media, a lot of times people's first reaction is to say like, Google is free, or you could just Google this. But for young people, TikTok and Instagram have become that search engine, right? And recently, almost 40% of Gen Z, they prefer to search on TikTok or Instagram as opposed to turning to Google. So why do you think that is? Why are young people searching for things in social media as opposed to search engines? And does that concern you guys at all?
I think it has a lot to do with the sort of coolness factor and wanting to be accepted. Like, if you look up on Google for a credible source, you're more likely to get something that covers all sides of the situation. Where if you go on TikTok or Instagram, you're going to see something that you believe you're supposed to agree with. Um, And I feel like that's a big part of why teens are so scared to embrace the nuance in conversation, especially about political topics. So yeah, I do think it's concerning, but I can understand why teens are turning away from Google and more towards what their peers have to think, because I mean, I feel like it's always been sort of a teen thing to want to be accepted. But it's just become a digital phenomenon now rather than an in-person social one.
Yeah, I also think that we as a generation really love like pictures and videos. We don't really want to read anymore. We're just attracted to something that's really quick. We get a quick answer and that's it. We don't want to go more into it. So I feel like that's why we turn to social media platforms, because that's where those visuals are more easily and readily available to us.
Yeah, that makes sense. And speaking of visuals, you talked a lot about aesthetics, right? And sharing of beautiful infographics as a way to feel politically involved. And this is really common whenever there's a crisis. Everyone wants to be very quick to post something to kind of show some support. This is also really common with the conflict that was happening in Ukraine. And for a lot of people who share misinformation, they often justify it by saying like, so what, this is ultimately raising awareness of an issue. So what do you have to say about that? People who are sharing infographics for good, and when they're called out, maybe don't care as much.
Okay. When you're sharing an infographic, if you think about it, what is it really doing? Like, I don't know how many story views people get on average, but say it's like 150. Those 150 people are probably scrolling through it. They're not stopping to read what it says. There are more active ways to kind of make your voice heard and do something about it. For instance, even going to a protest is more effective than just sort of sitting behind your screen. You can write letters, you can call people, you can join a protest, like I just said, sort of actually be out there, do something more like even like physically active, like writing or going somewhere, because that is in the long run more effective and probably more credible. You're not like just reading something and reposting it without double checking. And those people who sort of do sit behind their screens and are like, oh, but I'm raising awareness. Are you really? Because it's just a few people are seeing it and they're probably not going to do anything about it either. So you're really spreading more misinformation than actual good per se.
Yeah, and just to add on a little bit to what Agatha was saying, it's really just performative, which I know is a huge buzzword with press freedom people. Um, but it's really performative. People are playing the part of somebody politically active who is invested in these situations. And a lot of the time, it's unoriginal. Like you're scrolling through all your stories, right? And you see the same thing repeated over and over again, and eventually it loses its meaning. So, like Agatha said, I think it's really important to show your support in other ways, preferably ways that are not online.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Sophia, I think you mentioned this at the start of the presentation, but you talked about the idea of young people being perceived as digitally savvy. One buzzword that older people like to say when describing Gen Z is the term digital native. And we know that you're not just born with the innate skills to be able to judge if something is a good source or a sus source. But what are your thoughts on being described as digital natives? Do you think that's a helpful term? Is it something that we should be avoiding moving forward? Is it cringe? Or do you describe yourselves as digital natives?
I mean, I think the saying has some truth. At the same time, it puts a lot of pressure on Gen Z to be constantly active and constantly factual and constantly, knowing what's up on social media. And a lot of the time, it can pressure young people into being politically active or being invested in social media trends when really what they should be doing is, I mean, I don't want to say reading a book, but reading a book, you know, like or reading a newspaper or reading something with some actual veracity instead of just scrolling through social media.
I mean, also just
Yeah.
to add on quickly, like social media isn't necessarily all that bad. It's just that what we as, I guess, TPF and as an organization have more of an issue with is that our generation is sort of turning to it as a news source, and it's spreading all of this misinformation that we're going to like keep with us as we become politicians and as we become in charge of the world. So yeah, use it to kind of post about your friends, to post about what happens in your life, but not necessarily to read the news and to educate yourself, because you can do that by reading other newspapers or like reading books, doing things that are a little bit more active.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and it's wow, I just completely forgot what I was gonna say. Um, well, yeah, what I was gonna say is, it's not that we're better at discerning between factual and non-factual information. It's that we're better at physically navigating the apps, which makes it almost worse because people place their trust, on the whole, people place their trust in Gen Z to figure out social media and to figure out its limitations. And a lot of the time, we're still just teenagers and we don't really know what we're doing. So, a lot of the time it can be pretty loaded, I guess, to say that Gen Z are digital natives and that they have a responsibility to use social media responsibly, because it's a big power to have your ideas broadcasted to the whole world.
Yeah, that's very interesting that we put so much faith in Gen Z, or that we like put so much weight in these words as well. It's really interesting, Sophia. I'm really curious about, you both are clearly very passionate about your quality of news. And I guess I'm just really interested in how you are navigating maybe tough conversations with your friends or family members who maybe aren't as engaged in news literacy, or how you're having conversations when you see a friend on social media possibly sharing misinformation. What are the best ways that you found to kind of have a conversation, as you said, as opposed to escalating it to an argument?
Well, a lot of the time, my friends aren't as invested in media literacy and the downfalls of social media as I am, but they can pretty much recognize when a claim is super outrageous. But a lot of the time, they give it weight by saying, "Oh, haha, look, isn't this so funny? This is so not true." And I'm like, "Well, yeah, but also, you might be encouraging someone else to look into that further, or you might be encouraging someone else to continue to spread that misinformation." Like, I think the best way to think about it is that words have weight, but social media posts have more weight because more people are seeing them and more people are interacting with them. And that you should really be careful what you're posting and what you're saying. And you hear that all the time from adults, but not a lot from teens. And I think it's really important to have those peer-to-peer discussions.
Yeah, I agree. It's often pretty difficult for me to have conversations like with my family, but over time we've gotten better at it. I'll be like, well, what makes you say that? Or where did you read that? And how about you look into it a little bit more? We'll each bring our like own sources to the table, because generally we don't necessarily read like the same newspapers or the same articles. So we'll kind of compile them, see what's true, see what's not. I'll do the same with my friends. I'll be like, well, why are you saying that? Or where did you see that? And can you explain more to me about what you're saying, just so that I can understand what makes you say that and why you're saying it? And sort of see where they're coming from, and then kind of talk to them about that and maybe try to move them in the right direction so it doesn't happen.
Yeah, swapping sources is always a really great technique. And that was kind of the question that Jean Ann asked. She asked, how do you deal with parents or relatives sharing false info? So I think we touched on that. This question's from Kate. They asked, how would you help encourage your peers to do their own research rather than accepting the meme, the blurb, the pic, the gorgeous infographic?
That's a tough one. I know myself, I can be super stubborn, and like if somebody challenges what I believe, I'll kind of get defensive. And I feel like just to reel that back is difficult, especially for teens who are encouraged to have this monolithic persona. So I think that encouraging friends to look at Fox News, like look at something that doesn't align with their political beliefs and see what they have to say, even if it seems untrue or even if it seems kind of outrageous. It's important to see what the other side is saying and accept that and try and find more nuanced points of view.
I am going to say the exact same thing. So
So when you are on social media and you come across something that you're suspicious of, or you're just kind of doing just general news gathering, what are some of the media literacy skills that you use on a regular basis? Some of your kind of go-tos?
So on social media, for instance, if I like see a post, I'll be like, well, who posted this? Where did they get it from? And then kind of research who wrote it. If I'm on like online reading my articles, I'll often go to a different source because like as great as one newspaper can be, they're not always going to have the most accurate information about something, or the author writing it might not be very, I guess, like open to the other side. They're very one-sided, very biased. There we go, that's the word. So I would go to another source that maybe has a different opinion and see what they say and kind of compare like what are the facts between the two that are true and what is different, and kind of form my own opinion from there.
Yeah, I agree. And there are certain types of language used on social media that can indicate that what you're reading is not true or is misleading. A lot of times when I see like only, the word only, like this is the only way to cure blah 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 sickness, or this is the only way to fix your problem. I'm like, is it really though? And I look and I research and um I feel like a lot of the time, if you see something like that, such an extreme statement, um, a lot of time it's not true or it's only partially true.
Yeah, there are a lot of red flag phrases like, you know, share this before it gets taken down. It's like, well, why is it going to get taken down? Maybe it's a little suspicious. Or, you know, phrases like, they don't want you to know, or, you know, the media is not covering this. These kind of red flag phrases that stand out. But when you're not on social media, where are you kind of getting your news from?
Well, I like to look at newspapers, not just one, because a lot of times the writers, not just the writers, but the publishers and the newspaper staff can be inadvertently a little bit biased to whatever side that they agree with of a situation. So I look at different sources. I look at the New York Times, the Washington Post, BBC, international sources, and I try and if I'm really interested in finding a solution to something or somehow that I can take action to help with something, I'm like, well, what's the most empathetic, the most considerate way that I can do so?
I would say the same. Also, it really depends on like what I'm researching. So for instance, something that's happening in the Middle East, well, on the one hand, I would turn to the New York Times. They're also not necessarily the most credible in that like area. So also reading Al Jazeera sometimes could help because you can hear what's happening from journalists who are actually there. So kind of like never reading just one article on a certain situation because it's not always going to be the most accurate and the most honest.
Yeah, I think we might have time for a couple more questions if anyone wants to use that Q&A answer box. You know, I think in 2020, there are a lot of things that you could want to put your time and effort behind. There are a lot of social justice issues, there are climate change. There's so many things that you could be very passionate about or spend your time on. Why news literacy? Why press freedom? What about press freedom that made you want to be involved with Teens for Press Freedom? compared to
well,
any other social issue that you could be involved in.
yeah, well, I feel like the press is where we get our information. So press freedom is really intertwined with every issue you could think of. It's like press freedom, everything else, like everything is sort of under the umbrella of how it's covered by the press. So if we have a reliable press, then we can have reliable information about other issues and learn how best to address them or how best to take action ourselves.
So censorship is really like the root of the problem here. So when people aren't hearing about certain situations, it's because of censorship. It's not just because. So working on press freedom, making sure that journalists aren't censored everywhere, ever again, is pretty important to know that voices are heard. And I feel like also I'm not necessarily limited to TPF. I can still go out. I might not necessarily work behind the scenes, but I can still go out to all these different protests and help people out. And TPF often joins forces with other organizations too. So I feel like we can sort of make change in various fields without having to focus on just one.
Amazing. Let's kind of leave off on one note for educators. Sophia, you talked about a couple tips for teachers when they're talking about news literacy, media literacy. But if you were taking a media literacy class like right now, what would a teacher have to do to make you really care about the state of news literacy or the state of media?
Well, for me, have always been passionate about media literacy. But hypothetically, if I was just sort of apathetic, I would probably be most moved if I knew that it had happened to me. Like once one of my teachers said, how many of you have seen something that you know was false on social media and did nothing about it? And every single person in the room raised their hand. And that's really telling. And I think it's really impactful for teens to see that this issue impacts not just them, not just their classmates, but everyone. And knowing that the issue is so far reaching and widespread makes you feel less alone and makes you feel less like you have to deal with it by yourself. So I feel like that would be, for me, a really good way to get kids to sort of snap to attention about this issue.
We have sorry. Another question. Sorry, the Q&A kind of filled up right after I asked that one. So let's end on this. And then I have a couple announcements for next week, but this is for both of you. And this question is from Kira. What do you recommend to other teens to not get burnt out on social issues or burnt out on the news?
It's a good one. I guess don't necessarily like always involve yourself in social issues. Take a break from it like a little bit. I feel like on Gen Z, there's this huge pressure to be involved socially in everything. You don't have to do that. Like take a break, relax a little bit, read the news, educate yourself, know what's happening in the world. And as tough as it can be, know that there are other people like with you and that it's not like just you who has to fight all these issues. And you're also 15, 16, 17. It's okay. You don't have to solve every problem in the world just now. You have quite a bit of time to do that later. So.
Amazing. Well, this has been such an interesting conversation. I think what you're doing is just so cool. Do you want to kind of plug where people can follow what you're doing?
Yeah, I'm just about to send it in the chat. So yeah, I just sent out our email. Everything is at Teens for Press Freedom. We're on Instagram. You can DM us if you want. We just post about like events that we're doing or workshops that we're holding. So yeah, you can stay up to date there. And if you want more information, you can go to teensforpressfreedom.org. We have a lot of stuff about us on there, different teams, what we are, who we do. Who we are, what we do. There we go. And yeah, everything's on there.
Amazing. I just want to, I know we are almost at time. I just want to do a quick reminder for everyone that next week's webinar on September 7th, we're back at the normal time at 5 p.m. Eastern. And we'll be joined by the Center for Public Integrity's senior editor for discussion on the Freedom of Information Act and how journalists use it to tell transparent, but also inclusive stories. So it'll be really interesting. Hope all of you can join. Again, Agatha, Sophia, I just want to say thank you again. This has been just a really great insight into Gen Z and how you consume media. And I'm so glad that you're able to join us.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having us. This was, I mean, kind of geeky, but I think it was fun.
That's funny. All right. Thank you so much. I will hang on for a little bit if anyone has any questions. But Agatha, Sophia, I'm super excited to see what you all do next at Teens for Press Freedom.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, I forgot to share my screen again with that question box. But okay. All right, I don't think we have any final questions.